Hi, Soren. First of all, thank you so much for joining us today on Sci-Tech Suite. It's such a pleasure having you here and sharing a lot of insights on your expertise in climate change and in green finance. And it's lovely to have you here. I would like to quickly ask you if you could introduce yourself for our audience, please.
Yes. Hi, Karina. Great to be with you, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Soren Gigler. I am head of the data economy program at the GIZ, but I'm also an adjunct professor. I've been teaching many years at the Georgetown University and also the LSE in London. And I'm really passionate about digital and green and climate action.
That's great. That's perfect. I'm really excited about that. So, one of the most critical aspects in sustainability that we encounter nowadays, and we might have a lot of buzzwords around green finance. So, what's your expertise here and how we can address them, especially on the current global context?
So the key challenge is that a lot of financing is needed for innovation. So the Paris Agreement specifically mentions innovations, that we need to innovate, we need to have new tech, because about 30-40% of the climate change we cannot reach. So we are unable to reach the climate goals with the technology you have at the hand. So we need to innovate. So now I'm coming to finance, yeah? So basically there is this big financing gap, and it's because innovative green tech is just so much more difficult and more risky to finance. So you need basically long-term financing, patient capital. You need to enhance really startups, foster the whole innovation ecosystem, and to enable people to innovate and take the innovations out of the lab, like in Zurich, right? The ETH, when it's out of the lab into the market. So basically, and there are huge pledges, yeah, about financing more climate action. There's still a huge, very significant investment gap in terms of really financing innovative green tech solutions.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And what are a couple of use cases that we might present to our audience to make them understand what are a couple of interesting use cases, especially on green finance, as I came across a lot about green finance, and a lot of startups are trying to build up innovation and technology. And I think that we might always see innovative use cases.
Yeah, so we actually strongly supporting innovative use cases in the global south. So I can give you a concrete example. So tracking the NDCs. So for instance, we are now working with the government of South Africa in better supporting them to track and trace the greenhouse gas emissions at the national level. So a use case on a monitoring and evaluation platform that uses blockchain-enabled technology and other tools, basically, and IoT tools, or digital, we call it digital MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification, to first of all gather the data, second process the data, and then to put them together into a platform, a portal, in a way, a one-stop shop, where you really track and trace all the greenhouse gas emissions around of the country.
Yeah, exactly. I heard a lot of discussions about that. But what are still a couple of challenges that people might encounter in developing these kind of solutions?
Yes, so the current status is actually that many countries, yeah, believe it or not, are using simple Excel sheets to track the data, the national data on how much greenhouse gas emissions they're emitting, there are no strong monitoring evaluation tools. And so a key challenge, okay, the first is it's all about data. So the first is like a data gap, yeah? So we talk a lot about, at COP, we're also very active at COP28. We work closely with UNFCCC, UNEP, World Bank, and others on basically these global programs. But once you go on the ground, okay, so you are in Kenya, in Senegal, or any country in Asia, Latin America, what you will find that there's a lot of missing data. So the companies still do not really report as much as we wanted on the greenhouse gas emissions. Another challenge is that the sectors, there's the Ministry of Environment, for instance, so they are tracking these things. But how much actually is the agriculture emitting, or transport sector, and how does the agricultural ministry or the agricultural sector report on greenhouse gas emissions to the ministry? So a key challenge is the data gap. The second is the sharing of data. So how you better share data. And the third I really would like to emphasize is still transparency and accountability. So a lot of that information and data is still not transparent enough. There's been a lot of discussion at COP, the Loss and Damage Fund, and other funds. But the topic is or carbon markets. So the key issue is to use data, use innovations and technology to enhance the transparency and accountability and efficiency of markets.
That's a really complex answer. Thank you so much. And what about a couple of, economical policies that we might still have to review? Let's say, for example, in Switzerland, as an example, as we do live in Switzerland. And are they also other type of technologies that might help enhancing, these use cases? For example, artificial intelligence. A lot of people are using artificial intelligence solutions also when it comes to climate change and green finance solutions.
Yeah, it's a great question, Karina. So I think the governments can do a lot on fostering innovation. So in Switzerland, it's very good ecosystem. We have such a strong ecosystem of great innovations, great startups, but also smaller countries. I worked a lot with Estonia, for instance, has a very pro-startup, pro-innovation policies. So the first thing is really, I think, to enable a pro-innovation ecosystem, to allow people to experiment, to enable researchers to come out of the lab and into the market. So, and their AI solutions, but also blockchain, IoT, but not particularly AI, has huge opportunities. But the challenge is then, and even in the US, for instance, did you know that only 6% roughly, or 5 to 6% of venture capital in the US actually goes towards green tech? So in spite of all of that talk, it's just so much easier to invest in software or in other tech, but in green tech, because it's hard, or deep tech, it's hard to develop. It takes longer, it's riskier. So the second thing it's needed, and the European Union does now a lot of that, to support investments, so Invest EU, for instance, other programs, to basically support innovations that they can be taken out of the lab and be scaled up and being brought to the market.
Welcome to Sci-Tech Swiss, the fastest growing world-class podcast of all times. We're kicking off the new year with a sponsorship drive during the WIFE Week in Davos with an exciting ad campaign with Ringier, Karina, over to you, and tell our audience how they can hitch their wagon to our star.
Become a sponsor for the next episode or reproduce one for you in our professional studio. Find us on premierswissmedia.com. Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with that. And because I think that everything starts from education. Do you think that, especially students, university students, I'm addressing also to them right now, what do you think that they still need to learn, especially when it comes to adopting these kind of technologies? What are a couple of details that they might need to take into consideration so that they might avoid a couple of risks?
Well, first thing I want to say that young people and students are the change agents. So actually, people like myself, we all have to learn much more than the students. So, for instance, we are working a lot in Kenya, in Senegal, South Africa. So, the students in Kenya, you should see the programmers, the Silicon Valley, Silicon Safari, some call it, because basically there is actually huge capacity there and really talent, yeah. So one thing, but having said that, so one is to unleash this talent. And the second, I really want to make point how we can better connect innovators in Europe with innovators in the global South. There's a lot of how students can work together, have joint ventures with Ushahidi and others. So we at the GIZ, are supporting a lot of young people and students through capacity building and training. So we created with our partners an academy called Smart Africa, Smart Africa, the SADA Digital Academy. Sorry, Smart Africa Digital Academy, and it's really also what the point I want to make. It's not only about tech skills, but how you apply technology to solve real life problems. And there, I think there's still a lot has to be done.
Exactly. And what are also a couple of things that we can do? Maybe we didn't have a degree as a software engineer, but we are not all of us are tech people here, but what are some simple things that we can do to innovate, or what are a couple of things that we need to look up to on how we can, for example, create a better world and, fight against, climate change that's been an issue in the past few years?
Well, I think one topic is that what we can do is bring innovators together with investors. So building that bridge, because there are a lot of tech, have tech skills and innovations in AI, blockchain, so forth, but a lot of the startups are missing actually the advanced financial skills or financial literacy. And on the other side, a lot of the investment community, the venture capitalists and others, don't fully understand the technologies and the green tech. So bringing these two worlds together, I think, is very important. And then also support the acceleration of programs. So we are now actually on the 31st of January, next week, launching the pitch event in Rwanda, where we have worked very closely on a digital green innovation accelerator program. So supporting startups that they can accelerate the innovations and scale them up. So what we can do, is to support the talents, identify the best innovations, and then to support them in the acceleration and linking them with each other, particularly linking innovators from Africa, Asia, Latin America with Europe.
That sounds really interesting, and I totally agree with that. And I think that in Switzerland, especially here, they have a lot of opportunities because they are educating people about, all these kind of technological advancements and on green finance. And I think that, also what CV Labs is doing, for example, is very interesting, connecting, investors with a lot of startups. But another question that I might have is, What are you looking as an investor, for example, to see in a startup? In a startup, how can a startup come up with an interesting idea, an interesting solution, but also, not really going too far away from the financial expertise to take that into consideration?
So that's an excellent question. So we, as Chia said, we developed a so-called digital investment facility. So what does that mean? Yeah, that a lot of the tech companies and the tech innovators don't yet have bankable projects. Their projects are not like investment ready. So if an investor comes, and looks at their business plans and at their financials and their projected gains and profit, they are not ready to really present their project. The projects are not yet mature enough that they can be financed. So that's why we have this facility we have launched together with Finland and the European Union. So we have basically a Team Europe initiative that specifically focuses on supporting data economy programs and bridging this gap. What I want to say is, investors sometimes misunderstand technologists, and technologists don't know how to pitch very well their innovations to the finance community. And there is a need to basically support them and bring them together, and to particularly enable innovators and tech community to scale up their projects and startups.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And what I still wanted to ask in particular about the COP28, were there any interesting discussions for seeing other technological advancements or other countries coming up with, interesting technologies that might be really trustworthy and interesting to present?
Yes, so we work closely with the UNFCCC and also the ITU and World Bank and the European Union so what we did, we organized, for instance, a session on AI for climate action. So now what happened, we have identified early stage innovators that use AI to solve climate problems. So for instance, you can use AI for the climate adaptation. So a real case we are supporting through our Fair Forward program in Indonesia. You use AI for forestry to better identify which parts of the forest you really should protect and preserve, because adaptation is a lot to focus on the most pristine and the most biodiversity richest areas. There you can use, for instance, AI. A second case is you can have AI for climate mitigation. So you can use huge amount of data, for instance, on mototaxis. Okay, mototaxis emit a lot of emissions, but then you can use IoT tools to gather the data, then use AI to interpret the data, and to demonstrate how you could then create models to show how you can reduce the emissions of, for instance, these mototaxis. So there's a lot of room, but what I want to emphasize is at COP28, there's always a lot of debate on the financing and the financing between the global north and the global south. So we need to move away from pledges to real action and real financing, and support the innovators and the climate actions in the south, because in the global south, that's where a lot of the potential is, but also the biggest increase expected in greenhouse gas emissions over the next 20, 30 years.
Exactly. And what are also a couple of predictions that we might see in the next, let's say, 4 or 5 years?
Well, predictions in terms of climate or
In
well,
terms of climate change, what are a couple of predictions
change.
when it comes to climate change?
Well, unfortunately, the predictions aren't very favorable, so we we will have definitely much more severe weather conditions. For instance, extreme droughts, inundations. What is most important, Karina, that the lives of people are directly affected. So it's unimaginable. You can imagine in Eastern Africa, around 24 million people, 24 million are being, due to climate change and extreme drought, are now threatened complete poverty and hunger. So it's their livelihoods, yeah, which is threatened. And that's something we need to address, because if you have, you know, all these crises around the world and people are living in extreme poverty and hunger, that is basically, yeah, right, besides the moral impediment, like the immoral obligations we have to support it, it's also very important to support this from a global perspective, that we have a global community addressing those challenges and the most vulnerable. So one of the predictions is that people who are poor are most vulnerable, and they will unfortunately have the biggest negative consequences of climate change.
Yeah, that's right, unfortunately. But also one of my questions when I was discussing also with a couple of scientists and with a couple of, experts on climate change is that, most of these third world countries, they don't always have access to, these powerful technologies, these latest technology advancements. I mean, they obviously don't even have like food supply, or they might even, encounter other, issues such as, also including climate change. But how can we actually ensure that they come across these kind of, powerful, interesting technologies, and that we encourage these people to use these kind of technologies?
Well, in a way, it's a huge contradiction. So, on the one hand, you have, for instance, in India, Brazil, Kenya, Indonesia, you have like real pockets of innovation, like and access to amazing technology. So, a lot of technology can come from the global south, right? And then on the other hand, you have inside countries, communities who have complete no access to these technologies. So 2.7 billion people in the world still don't have access to the internet. So one of the key issues to close the digital divide, yeah, but then also where we are working a lot on empowering people to use data and new technologies to improve their lives and economic and social conditions. So it's basically, one is about the access gap, but then, as you said, it's also about the students and the capacity, to a lot of capacity building, training, also of women. There's a big gender digital divide, that women unfortunately continue to have much worse lack access. But we can do a lot. And one thing I really want to say again is to connect people. The solutions are there. We are facilitators. We are enabling the young people to come up with this creativity and find the solutions, and then to provide technical support, knowledge, capacity, and financing so that this can be scaled up.
Oh, thank you so much for the great answer. I totally agree with that. And the last question that I might have, that I'm actually asking everyone, is how can we make technology on our side as our friend and not really perceive it, as a threat? Because there are a lot of misconceptions about technology nowadays.
Well, I think the real important thing is that we use the so-called people-centered approach. So we talk about technology, we should really put people at the center and not technology itself. So basically, in the technology is an enabler, So AI can do all kind of things, AI for good, AI for bad. So we need to give it a orientation, a purpose, like AI with a purpose, and then basically leverage its opportunities for the good and for support socioeconomic, social development, but at the same time to be proactive to manage its risks, because it has risks. Yeah. But if we are aware of the risk and we can manage them, we should unleash the potential of technology, but for the well-being and the good of people around the world.
Wonderful answer. Well, definitely, I agree with that. And I agree also on the fact that we might need to also, as you mentioned before, to show more transparency and definitely review regulations. I think that you have clear and transparent regulations, and you have already discussed the most important factors and what are the key challenges. But when we connect people, as you said before, that's a totally powerful experience, because everyone can learn also from past mistakes, probably in the past 5 or 10 years. So definitely, I can also see on the flip side, yeah, there might be also a couple of negative consequences, but at the same time, I really looking forward to seeing more improvements on this side, and especially with the power of education. So with that, I would like to thank you so much for the interview, Soren. Looking forward to talking to you the next time about what else we can do with climate change. So we totally appreciate your time.